This is the seminar on public finance. In the first chapter of almost every textbook in public finance, there's some sort of justification for public finance in the first place. Namely, there's some sort of justification for there being taxes, because taxes are very different than payments in the market for goods and services. And typically, the justification for taxation, which I say is very different than prices and wages and interest and other market payments, is a thing called public goods. If there were no public goods, the implication is there'd be no justification for taxes. So let's look at the justification for public goods as is given in the typical textbook. Now, the justification goes as follows. They say that a public good is something where you cannot exclude non-payers from enjoying the thing. So what I've done is I've said at the top, can you exclude? If yes, it's a private good. If no, it's a public good. So for example, pizza is a private good. Can you exclude non-payers from enjoying pizza if they don't pay? Yes. You call the cops. If they come and grab pizza and they don't pay for it, you call the cops. And the pizza grabbers know that it's a very credible threat. Does this mean that there's never any pizza theft? No, sometimes people can steal pizza, but 99.9% of pizza is you're excluded if you don't pay. In contrast, can you exclude people from a crowded street? And here the mainstream textbook writers say, no, you can't, it's unfeasible. I mean, what are you going to do? Stand there with a tin cup and everyone walks by, you ask them for a penny or a tenth of a penny? It would just make it impossible to exclude non-payers. So to the extent that you cannot exclude non-payers, it's a public good. Okay, the second consideration is a thing called rivalrousness. And now the question is not whether you can exclude, but whether you should exclude. And they say that there are cases where you should exclude because the marginal cost of the thing is greater than zero. Namely, and pizza here is an example of, yes, you should exclude, because if I eat the pizza, you can't eat the pizza. If you eat the pizza, I can't eat the pizza. If I'm wearing this tie, you can't wear it, and vice versa. So you pretty much have to exclude in cases like that, because we can't both wear the tie, we can't both eat the pizza at the same time and in the same respect. So you should, because the costs are greater than zero, again. Whereas with regard to television and radio, here, can you exclude? Yes, you can exclude. All you do is you give out a TV, and then you jam the TV, and then you rent or sell people an unjamming device so that only people who pay can actually see the TV. So you can exclude TV, but should you exclude? No. You shouldn't exclude according to these guys. Why? Because if I'm broadcasting a TV program out to everyone, and this person who's now walking in late, what's your name? Young man, what's your name? Lucas. Should I exclude Lucas? Well, it costs me nothing to include him. Lucas now can enjoy the broadcast, and it costs nothing else. So I shouldn't exclude him, because if I do exclude him, GDP will not be maximized, and GDP maximization is a holy grail of these people, right? Because here, it costs me nothing to include Lucas, and if I charge him something, maybe he won't come. Even if I charge him a penny, he won't come, whereas if it was for free, he would come, So GDP will be higher if I don't exclude him. So even though I can exclude him, I shouldn't. Everyone clear so far on all this stuff? Okay, so what we have is a private good, pizza, and then we have crowded streets and TV, which are public goods, either because you can't exclude them or because you can but you shouldn't. And then we have another category called pure public goods. And here the idea is that not only can't you exclude, but even if you could, you shouldn't. And that's the case of defense, national defense, and the lighthouse. If I put up a lighthouse and it, how can I exclude a non-payer? If there are 4 boats out there that are paid, what am I going to do? Turn off the lighthouse for the one guy and keep it on for the 4? You can't. You can't exclude. And even if I could, I shouldn't. Because once I've got the lighthouse up and set and I've paid all the money to put the lighthouse up, if I don't allow it to benefit the extra boat, then GDP won't be as high as it could be. And similarly with national defense, you can't exclude if you tell the Ruskies or the Arabs or whoever the local bad guys are at the time that if you mess with us, we're going to drop one in the men's room of the Kremlin or the tent or wherever you are. I protect everyone. You can't exclude anyone from being protected, nor should you. Now, don't get the idea that in the view of these guys, the mainstream public finance people, that 25% of all goods fall into all these categories. For the Marxists, everything falls into public goods, even pizza. But and here's another way of telling the ball players without a scorecard: the more public goods they see, the more to the left they are. So the Marxists would probably see very few private goods at all. And in the Soviet Union, there were very few private goods, just consumer goods. You know, your own toothbrush, it's yours. Whereas the left, the Harvard types, might see more public goods. The Chicagoites, the right-wing types, the public choices would see fewer. Probably sociologists would see more public goods than economists. And you could distinguish between the various disciplines in academia. But let's take the Chicagoites. They wouldn't say that it's 25, 25, 25, 25. They would say, you know, virtually everything is here, and there are only a few aberrations here, a few here, and very few here. So government is justified in very small areas. But they would all disciplines, rather all reaches of the political spectrum, would agree with this analysis. In order to further solidify your understanding, what I have is another example of it. It's the same outline, only I'm giving a slightly different example because I think maybe this will, how shall I say it, buttress the point if some of you missed the other way of looking at it. Here what we see is, can you exclude? Well, on a street you can't. On a highway you can. Limited access highway you can exclude. On a public city street, even when it's empty, it's very hard to, it's not feasible to exclude. On the other hand, should you exclude? Well, you should exclude only when it's crowded. Because when it's crowded, each person imposes a cost on the other guy. If it's a crowded highway and you enter it, you slow everyone else down. If it's a crowded street, you enter it, you slow everyone else down. So you should exclude when it's crowded. Whereas when it's empty, what's the point of excluding? You get on the highway at 3 in the morning and then the next car is a mile in front of you and the car behind you is a mile behind. Are you slowing anyone else down? No. You could be excluded on the highway, but you shouldn't be because the place is bloody empty. Okay, so this is just another way of buttressing the point of excludability and rivalrousness. Let's get back to the main exhibit, because now what I want to do is show or indicate why I think that this is highly problematic. First of all, let's take this excludability business. Just because the government can't exclude, just because the government is so inefficient that it can't exclude its way out of a paper bag, doesn't mean the private market can't exclude. Private people are much more clever than government people. For example, a crowded street, the only way to keep people out is not by standing there with a little cup and asking them to put a penny in there. What you could do, and the way the Mises is excluding people from not being here, is they give out these little tickets, and they tell you to wear them, and if they see that you're not wearing them, they'll say, hey, you know, where's your ticket? And you say, well, what ticket? You know, and then they kick you out. So you could do that with a road or a street. Disneyland's got lots of streets. They don't let you into the streets until you pay in the first place. So don't think that just because the government can't exclude that the market can't exclude. How about defense? Well, sure, we can exclude people from protection. Let's suppose that there's a pacifist and we have a private company providing defense. And somebody, Gulchin over here, is a pacifist. She refused to pay me. And what I do is I give out these little things here to everyone else, but not to her. And I announce that if anyone messes with you guys, I'm going to come land on them like a ton of bricks. But if you mess with Gulchin, I'm not going to protect her. And if she wears one, it'll be a fake one, and she'll be guilty of fraud, stealing services. So I can exclude her. Can I exclude her perfectly? No. Because I'm such a great defense agency that most people are non-criminals, so she'll benefit from that. So I can't exclude her 100%, but I can exclude her. Similarly with the lighthouse. I can exclude lighthouse. I have a lighthouse here, and what I say to John, I always pick on people in the front row because I can't see the name tags in the back. John is a boatman, and he refuses to pay me for the lighthouse. And I say, John, look, I can't always exclude you, but you know, I can sort of see the shape of the boats out there, and one of these nights, you're going to be the only boat out there, and I'm going to shut the bloody thing off, and then you'll land on the rocks. And I'll make this public announcement, and John's workers, the guys on the boat, are going to say, hey, you got to pay me extra salary because, you know, Block is threatening to turn off the lights. And he's going to have to go slower. So can I exclude him perfectly? No. But I can pretty much exclude him. Now, there's a story behind the lighthouse, and it's a sad story for me, because in one of my early publications, when I criticized Coase on social cost, and I'm on the warpath against him on social cost, I try to say, to distinguish myself from a rabid dog, I try to say, well, you know, he's not bad on everything. You know, he's good on this, he's good on that, he's good on radio, he's good on free speech, and he's good on the lighthouse. Because he wrote this book saying that private enterprise can supply lighthouses. Only I didn't read it fully, I didn't read it carefully. Everyone else kept saying that Coase is great on the lighthouse, so I only read the thing, you know, 90% of it, but in the last page or so, my colleague at Loyola, Bill Barnett, and I had a $1 bet, and I lost the bet, because Coase really is weak on the lighthouse too. And we wrote up an article on the lighthouse, and in there I had a little footnote saying, look at this other article where one of the authors said that Coase was sound on the lighthouse, and he was wrong. So it's a cautionary tale, and what I learned from it is that I'm imperfect and I should read more carefully, but that if I make a mistake, I can publicly admit it, as I am now, publicly again admitting that I made this mistake. And, you know, there's no trapdoor here where you sort of disappear if you make a mistake. It's human to err. You just do your best. So don't be afraid to publish because you might make a mistake. There are some people who won't publish because they might make a mistake. Don't be afraid to get up here and give a public speech because you might make a mistake. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all human beings. There was another guy, a guy named Van Zandt, who correctly criticized Coase on this. And what he said was that, yes, there were... See, the mistake that Coase made was that in the epochs he described, the way they got the boats to pay the fee was when John docked his boat, the police came up to him and said, you're going to pay. And Coase couldn't distinguish a tax forcing John to pay? From a voluntary payment. I mean, these Chicagoites, the difference between a voluntary payment, which is just, and a coercive levy, which is not, somehow misses them, because the concept of justice doesn't exist for them somehow. They must have a gene missing or something. I don't know. This other guy, Van Zandt, said that Coase was wrong. There were no private lighthouses. And then what he did is he gave cases where there were monasteries and religious orders that provided lighthouses. And as far as I'm concerned, that's part of the market. The charitable section is part of the market. So Coase mislabeled or misassessed a governmental tax for voluntary payment, and Van Zandt made the opposite mistake. He, staring face to face with voluntary payment, regarded it as a tax. So both of these guys were wrong, and Barnett and mine article on the Lighthouse try to show this. Okay. So much for excludability. Now what's wrong with rivalrousness? What's wrong with rivalrousness and this MC greater than 0 and this MC equals 0 is marginal cost, or cost, in the Austrian view, is alternatives or opportunities foregone, and only the individual actor can know them, and a third party can't be assessing costs. The costs to you of being here, or the out-of-pocket or money costs that it took you to fly here or drive here, plus the opportunities that you're now foregoing by sitting here listening to a boring economics lecture when you could have been out there doing what? I don't know. Only you know what you would have been doing. Sleeping, riding a bicycle, robbing hubcaps as is your wont, or whatever it is that you would have been doing. That's the true cost, the opportunity you forego. So who are these guys to say what the costs are? I don't have time for questions, but this afternoon when we have those seminars, as far as I'm concerned, just ask any questions on anything. The non-rivalrousness, take the TV or the TV broadcast. Maybe I don't like, say your name again? Lucas. Maybe I don't like Lucas freeloading on me. He comes in and he watches my TV program and I can't charge him. Maybe it is a cost to me. Maybe I resent it. Look around you. There are empty seats here. Would it cost anything to get one more person sitting next to Gulchin? No. So according to this argument, since the cost is 0, we shouldn't exclude non-payers from any movie theater or hotel with less than a full capacity, right? Namely, every ballpark, movie theater, hotel. Well, hotel you have to still have some costs of changing the sheets and stuff like that. But forgetting about that, anytime a hotel or a ball field or a movie is less than 100% capacity, there are no costs of excluding according to these guys, which means that pretty much anything is going to be a public good. And then we're down into, pure socialism. Even pizza can be considered a public good because, sometimes you go to the airport and they've got pizzas already out there, and they're only allowed to keep them out, these little pizzas, they're only allowed to keep them out there for a certain number of minutes, because if they keep it out too long under the heat lamp, the pizza's no good anymore, and what they do is they throw it away. So the point is that these things, even under their own views, have no costs after they're made. In other words, there are costs of making them, but once they're there are no costs, no further costs at the point of sale. You get the point? So even pizza or hamburgers or things like that you have to throw out and thus, in their view, have negative costs, would be a public good. So I reject this way of looking at it. I think that this is a snare and a delusion, that rivalrousness and excludability do not establish that there are public goods, and without public goods, even in the view of the mainstream, there can be no justification for taxes. So I conclude there is no justification for taxes. Let me give you one more example. What they say is a thing called externalities, that we have to have public parks. Why do we have to have public parks? Because Public parks give off externality benefits, external economies or external benefits. For example, if I have a public park here, and Mr. A lives here and Mr. B lives here, then it's true there are certain private benefits that I can charge A and B for entrance into the park. Think Disney World or something like that. However, what I do is I increase the real estate values of A and B because they're near a park and real estate values are higher near a park. And therefore, since I can't capture those benefits as a private park owner, there'll be an underinvestment in parks. There'll be what do you call it, a market failure, and therefore government has to step in and have parks and libraries and things like that that kick off external benefits. There are problems with this as well. First of all, if I'm going to start a park, I'm the only one that knows where the park will be, right? So what I could do, if I'm thinking of having a park here, what I could do is buy up all the area there, not all of it, but a lot of it, at a low price, the non-park price. You got it? Before the park is there, all the area around the park has got a lower real estate value on the ground that the park will kick off positive benefits. So I don't have to buy every house there, but I could buy a lot of houses, and if no one will sell me houses there, I don't put the park there. I put the park over here, where I can buy up more stuff. And then I can buy options to buy land. Agree on a price, and then say if I exercise, for a very low price, I'll buy the option, which gives me the right to buy it at the agreed upon price later. So that's one objection. The other objection is this stuff is very subjective. Some people like living near a park, other people hate it. There are more crowds, and hooligans go to the park or what have you. They play basketball and play rap music or something late at night. So it's a negative externality. Namely, you can't definitively say anything about externalities. There's no way to demonstrate these things. This is moonshine, as Murray Rothbard might say. Okay, that's the public good story. Let me move on to Power and Market, Chapter 4. Again, I'm giving a cadenza, which is sort of my interpretation of what Murray says, and I urge you to read this book, or indeed any of Murray's books, because I'm a big fan of his. I think he is the best economist who ever wrote. Okay, so we're into binary intervention. You remember there was autistic, where the ruler just did something to the victim. There was binary, where the ruler made him give money, and then there was triangular, which was the subject of my last lecture on this, where the ruler tells two people how they can interact with each other. So now we're into binary. There are three ways that government can get revenue. It can borrow, it can inflate, which is the sneakiest way because it can blame other people for the higher prices, and last of all, it can tax, and we're now discussing taxation. And for Murray and me, government is just a gang with legitimacy. There is no way to distinguish a gang of hoodlums from a government. A government is, except for the public relations and the legitimacy. Let me tell you a little story about this to buttress the point. Think in terms of the beginning of the nation, the U.S., and you have 13 colonies, and there's someone out in the wilds of western Virginia or eastern Ohio or somewhere like that, and the tax collector, the revenuer, comes to this guy and says, okay, we're starting this club. We're not a coercive gang. It's a club. It's called the U.S. Club, and we'd like you to contribute to it. And the guy out in the boonies says, well, I wish you the best of luck in your new club, and I'll trade with you and I'll be peaceable. Good day, sir. And the tax collector says, you don't understand. You got to contribute to this club. The guy says, well, why do I have to contribute to the club? I thought you were not a gang. And he says, well, if you don't like it, leave. And the guy says, leave? My grandfather has been here for many years. I've homesteaded this land. Why are you kicking me off? If you kick me off, you're a coercive organization. The point is that, according to Spooner, the Constitution of No Authority, the U.S. government is not a club. It's a coercive organization, as proven by the fact that they force you to pay for it, and if you don't want to pay for it, they tell you to leave. Leave means you have to give up your private property. So what kind of a voluntary organization is that? Okay, what are the benefits and what are the burdens of taxation? The benefits are the politicians and the bureaucrats and their favored clients, among whom are the intellectuals, because the pen really is mightier than the sword. You think of a pen dueling with a sword and you think that the guy wielding the pen is going to lose and the sword will run him through. Not so, not so, because the pen determines in which way the sword is pointing. So intellectuals are very, very important for the state apparatus because they justify taxes with apologetics of this sort and many, many other buttresses for this criminal robber gang. And they therefore get paid a lot in the form of subsidies to do this. They are a junior partner in the state apparatus. Now, some people say that capitalism has solved the problem of production, and now it's up to the government to solve the problem of distribution. There are two things wrong with this. First of all, the market hasn't solved the problem of production. There'll always be a problem of production as long as there's scarcity. And there'll always be scarcity even if we have new inventions of various kinds, because there'll always be the problem of you can't be at two places at one time. Even if you can live forever, you can only do one thing at a time. And also there'll be the problem of if everyone wants to date Britney Spears or Tom Cruise, depending upon their tastes in these matters. Well, what about Britney Spears and Tom Cruise? They might not want to date 7 million people each. So there'll always be a shortage of them. Now, probably you can make an inflatable rubber doll that looks just like them with better technology, and you could hardly tell the difference. But the point is we might want them and not this inflatable rubber doll with plastic and all. So there'll always be scarcity in these two regards. And as long as there's scarcity, there'll be a problem of production. We'll want more than we have. And that's why we have jobs, because we live in an era of scarcity. But in the market, there's no problem of distribution. The distribution goes based on voluntary trade. The problem of distribution comes about only when the government collects money, and now it has to give it out to somebody, and that's the problem of distribution. Okay, what about tax incidence? That's a complicated situation. Tax incidence is the idea that even though the tax is leveled on someone, if prices change, he might not be forced to pay it. He might be able to slough it off onto some other people. Now, here the Austrians and the mainstream diverge in their views on tax incidence. In the Austrian view, to which I subscribe and which Murray Rothbard elaborates, there is no such thing as forward shifting. You can't shift the tax onto your customers. The idea behind that is something like cost push inflation. The reason we have inflation is because costs suddenly go higher. This is totally wrong. Now, Austrians are behind no one in their condemnation of unions, at least on libertarian grounds. Yet, we do not say that union demands raise prices or cause inflation, because if somehow they manage to raise a price or a wage and the money hasn't increased nor has the demand for money decreased, some other price will have to fall. Or take the oil sheiks. The oil sheiks double the price of oil. Does that cause a generalized inflation? No, because with the same amount of money floating around and no change in the demand for money, which we're assuming, if the price of oil rises, the price, and we only have so much money, well then the price of something else is going to have to fall. I like to call this the coulda, woulda, shoulda phenomenon, or the coulda, woulda, shoulda principle. If the people could have raised their prices, They would have. Since they didn't before, they can't, because prices are at the level before the tax comes on at the price that maximizes profits. The view of the mainstream is very different. The view of the mainstream is we have a supply curve, and that's this S, not the S prime. And a tax comes up, and the tax shifts the supply curve in a vertical direction of 10. Now, the original price was 100, and we're at 0.1. Supply and demand were at 0.1. That was the equilibrium. Not that we're ever at equilibrium, but we have a tendency towards. So for shorthand, I have no real objection to saying we were at 0.1. Okay. So the tax raises by $10. And we move to 0.3. I illustrate 0.2 that it's $10 higher, and it's 110. And the seller has to pay the tax. And now what we're going to do is ask if the seller can shift it off onto anyone else. And according to the mainstream people, if you have a relatively flat demand curve, as I'm illustrating here with a sort of a flat demand curve, the price only goes up to 102. So the seller pays a tax of 10, but he gains $2, and therefore the incidence on the seller is 8. So he's only able to shift off $2 of it onto the buyer. And the reasoning is the more elastic or the flatter the demand curve, the more the demanders can get away from paying the tax, and the less that the supplier can shift onto the demand side. But shift he can, according to these people. Let me give you another illustration of this, and here we have a more vertical or inelastic demand curve. And again, the original 0.1, can you see it pretty well that way? Okay. We're at 0.1 at 100. 0.2 would indicate 110, namely there's a vertical move between the supply curves of $10. Now, because of the verticalness, the price rises to 107. So again, the seller pays a tax of 10, but he gains 7. So the incidence on sellers is $3, and he can shift $7 onto the buyer. This would be the mainstream way of looking at taxes. Yesterday, Bob Murphy gave a very good explanation of why we Austrians reject this. He gave the case of the $5 cup of coffee on Broadway. Whereas if you go back home to where you live in the outer suburbs or somewhere, the cup of coffee is $1, $1.50. And the mainstream analysis is cost push inflation, namely the real estate cost is so high, that's why the cup of coffee has to be so high. Whereas the Austrians say that the direction of causation is the inverse. Why is it that the real estate prices are so high in New York City? And the reason is that people have a great demand for stuff in New York City, so the thing comes from the demand side, not from the supply curve. The supply side, you can't push tax incidence forward. Now, it's true that if the tax causes, I'm now quoting from Murray Rothbard, if the tax causes the supply of the good to decrease, and therefore there's a price rise on the market, that might occur, but this can hardly be called shifting per se, for shifting implies that the tax is passed on with little or no trouble to the producer. If some producers must go out of business in order for the tax to be, quote, shifted, it is hardly shifting in the proper sense, but should be placed in the category of other effects on taxation. So here the Austrians have a different view of taxation from the mainstream people. And let me now move to the next section of the paper. And here Murray is talking about all sorts of different kinds of taxes and what are their economic analyses. For example, the excess profits tax. I once saw a great cartoon, a whole bunch of board type people were sitting around a table, and one guy said, I've been on the board for 30 years and I've never seen an excess profit in my whole life. you know, my excess profit is your, I don't know, something else. This is a subjective thing. For the Austrians, profits is a way of helping resources get allocated. If there's a storm in Florida, yes, profits will go up in candles and flashlight batteries and water and milk and orange juice and things like that. But this extra price and extra profit will draw these services into Florida, thus reducing the price. And this is the way the market helps us cooperate with each other. If you have an excess profits tax, it's sort of like having a decibel control for hikers lost in the woods. When a hiker is lost in the woods, what he wants to do is shout, "Help, help!" And if you have a decibel control, you can only go, "Help, help!" And then no one can hear him. So what's the point of yelling out help? What profits are a cry for help. If profits are high, that shows that people really want the thing, and other people will have an incentive to come and help them. But if you have an excess profits tax and you won't allow people to make big profits in areas where people really want stuff, well then the only reason that they'll help you is out of benevolence. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm in favor of benevolence. You know, I have friends and, you know, I'm benevolent toward them. But the point is, you can only be benevolent to people you know, and the human being is constituted such that he can only know, what, 50, 100 people, 200 people? It's a joke in Hollywood to say I had a party and I invited 100,000 of my best friends. You can't have 100,000 best friends. The human person is just incapable of knowing so many people, and yet we live in an economy of millions of people. The only way you're going to get people in Texas or Ohio to help the Floridians who are stuck in this bad weather situation is through self-interest. And Adam Smith said it's not from benevolence that the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker give us their product. It's rather out of a keen appreciation of their self-interest. And excess profits taxes are or laws against price gouging are ways of stopping this selfish reason to help each other and leave us only with benevolence. The church sort of runs on benevolence, and they think that benevolence is the only motive that can help people. They're missing out on self-interest. And indeed, I've claimed that sociobiology makes it such that we're sort of hardwired to appreciate benevolence, but not to appreciate markets and profits, which is why we don't have more free enterprise than we do. Okay, another point that Murray makes very well is that everybody's always moaning and whining and complaining about progressive taxes. And they're saying progressive taxes are horrible. We have to have a flat tax. You know, this is a big thing on the part of the conservatives. Well, which would you rather have? A proportional tax of 90% for everyone, or a very high progressive tax of 1% for the poor and 2% for the rich? Obviously, the progressive tax at a low level is much better than a proportional tax at a high level. So progressivity isn't the be-all and end-all of bad. Now what Murray does is he gets into Henry George, and he spends a lot of time on Henry George. I won't spend quite so much time on him as Murray does. The reason Murray does is because when he wrote the book, the Henry George School was a big competitor in the free enterprise field. A lot of people were Georgists, and Murray thinks that Henry George was wrong, and he wanted to show this. Nowadays, there are hardly any Georges, so it hardly pays to, pulverize them. But a good swift kick, my motto is when they're down, give them a kick. So the Georges are down, so I'll give them a little bit of a kick, as much of a kick as they deserve. Henry George said we should have a single tax on land on nothing else. Murray says, well, I agree with half of that, namely no taxes on anything else, but he disagrees with a tax on land. Why does Murray disagree with a tax on land? Well, George has this idea that in that way we can force idle land into use. He has this fetish that if there's any idle land, it's no good. Well, first of all, idleness is very subjective. Right now in all of our closets, we've got idle underwear that's not doing anything except sitting in a drawer. Well, should we be penalized for having idle clothes and idle ties and idle shirts and idle skates that we're not using now? No. This idle stuff is performing a service. The service is that, we can always get it and use it when we want. There's another point, and that is that labor is scarce compared to land. Happily, we've got submarginal land that we need not use. If it were the reverse, we'd have super abundant population, and the marginal productivity of the marginal person would be below zero. See, right now the marginal productivity of the submarginal land is below zero, as shown by the fact that we don't go up to the tundra in northern Russia or in Canada or in the middle of Alaska and start plowing that land. Even in places like Nevada, there's submarginal land. Happily, because if it weren't that way, there'd be submarginal people, and the marginal revenue product of people would be below zero. We have a proof that this has never been true in all of history, because we have had slavery. Now notice, I'm not certainly justifying slavery. I'm opposed to slavery. It's a violation of the libertarian axiom of non-aggression. But the question is, just a purely economic issue is, how much would you pay for a slave whose marginal productivity was below zero? And the answer is nothing. I mean, if a slave's productivity is below zero, that means he can't produce enough to feed himself, let alone produce something for you as the slave owner, so you would never buy one. But all throughout history, we've had slavery, which shows that the slaves had marginal productivity above zero. So this idea of immiseration and if it were not for generosity, wages would be zero, is just silly. Wages are what marginal revenue product is, and they're way above the subsistence level. Okay, another point is that George is against land speculation. He's against speculation in general, and he's certainly against land speculation. The point is that land speculators have a role to play in the economy, and the role that they play in the economy is to get the land out of the hands of people that can use it to less effect and into the hands of people who can use it to more effect. When a landlord chooses tenants, what he's doing is trying to pick the one who values it most, namely who can pay the most and who will be least disruptive of the other tenants, etc. So don't think that just because a landlord, doesn't do anything except pick and choose who gets his land or who rents it, that he's not contributing to the economy. He most certainly is. At one time, there were the physiocrats who said that the only productive thing was farming. Then later came economists who said, well, yes, farming is productive, but so is manufacturing. But services aren't. Then we got more sophisticated, and we said, yes, farming, manufacturing, and services are productive. The Austrian view is that anything that two consenting adults do is productive. Yes, farming, yes, manufacturing, yes, services, but also yes, speculation, buying and selling. There was this wonderful movie, The Bonfire of the Vanities. Did anyone see that movie? Just one or two old codgers like us. What happened there was this financial intermediary guy, and his daughter comes to him and says, well, my classmate Sally, her father produces oil. My classmate Mary, her father produces books. What do you produce, Daddy? He's a financial intermediary who buys and sells stocks and bonds. And he couldn't answer. And the implication of the movie is that there is no public good served by these people. And obviously there is. Whenever there's a purchase and a sale, there's always a mutual benefit. As the bloodstream runs the economy, so do speculators and buyers and sellers of things allocate resources to where they're most needed. This is a very important function of these people, and yet it's unappreciated. And Henry George certainly doesn't appreciate it because he thinks only land is great or something. I want to introduce the Laffer curve to you. What the Laffer curve says is that here is government revenue, and here is the tax rate. And he says if the tax rate is 0, what will revenue be? Obviously 0. And he also says that if the tax rate is 100%, what will revenue be? Also 0, because no one will work if they take everything away. In one of my previous lectures, I mentioned that there was a marginal rate of 110%. Namely, if you make an extra 10,000, they tax you 11,000, which is, super weird. But in any case, let's limit our vision to 0 to 100. And then if the tax rate rises a little bit, so does the revenue. And since we know we have to get to this point, the thing has to bend backwards. And here is the tax rate. I'm not sure what it is, say 35% to just pick a number, at which government revenue is maximized. And somehow a lot of economists say, well, we ought to have a tax rate of 35% because government revenue will be maximized. And you have to say, whoa, wait, hold on 1 second. This is a robber gang here. We don't want their revenue maximized. I once ran into a so-called libertarian who argued that we ought to legalize drugs. Why should we legalize drugs? Because right now the government gets no revenue from it because it's illegal. And if we legalize it, the government could get tax revenue off of it. And my view is, well, that's one reason not to legalize drugs, because the government already has way too much money. We don't want them to have more money. Okay, another point that I would make with regard to the Henry George view is that if you can't charge for land, and here is the supply and demand of land, and here is the maximum price of land, because you can't charge for it because they take everything away, so why would you charge for it? Well then, how do you determine who gets land? See, right now the way you determine who gets land is who bids the most for it. Under that case, it would be sort of first come, first served. Now there's a little interesting story behind this, and that is Manhattan. Right now, Manhattan and San Francisco, but let's pick Manhattan, and other central cities are beehives of activity. The real estate is very, very high there. So you'd think that all people who weren't really contributing very heavily would be booted out of Manhattan because of the high real estate prices. If you thought that, you didn't reckon with public housing. There is a public housing unit right behind Lincoln Center. It's around 63rd and 8th Avenue. This is some of the most valuable real estate on the planet. And these people in public housing are just, paying, $22 a month or whatever it is for places that could get $10,000 a month. Very, very high real estate. See, here you have an example of non-market activity messing up the allocation of people over the geography. If there were any coherence or any sense, these people would be banished out of Manhattan. If they had jobs of cleaning or making sandwiches or whatever, they'd have to commute in. And the people who would be living right near Lincoln Center, or the rest of Manhattan indeed, would be very, very highly productive people. And that would be a way to maximize the GDP. Not that I favor that overall, but I certainly favor it when it comes out of the free enterprise system. Now, Margaret Thatcher had a very interesting policy. What she did is she gave the public housing units to their occupants as sort of a condo. If the mayor of New York City, who won't do this, I'm sure, but if he were to give these apartments to the people who are now occupying them, not that I say it's just, I think it should be given to the people from whom the taxes were taken to make them, but forget about that for the moment. What would then happen? What would then happen is they'd sell it for $3.5 million for a little hole in the wall, and they'd move out to New Jersey. And we'd have some sort of coherence in terms of geographical settlement. But with the Henry George system, it's sort of like public housing run amok over the whole economy. So this is another argument against, it creates locational chaos, is the point. It's similar with what the government does when it subsidized mail delivery out in Alaska. Now, to have mail delivery in Alaska, it costs a lot. FedEx is going to charge more because, there's one guy and you have to go 600 miles into the bush or something and deal with the bears and the antelope and stuff like that. The point is that the only reason people should be out there is if their productivity is higher, enough higher so that it can support getting mail and eggs and orange juice and things like that. And indeed, that's the way it is, except for the government. The government brings in a bit of locational chaos into the situation by subsidizing things that shouldn't be subsidized, I guess. Another point is that land permeates every nook and cranny of the economy, like money. Money permeates everything except for barter. Everything occurs on some land. So land is very important, and Henry George is, sort of screwing up land. Okay, let's talk a little bit about speculation, because speculators are a reviled breed, and everyone hates speculators and all. The way I'd like to illustrate speculators is with the biblical story. Here is time. And here is quantity, and here is the fat years, and here are the lean years. And you remember that in the Bible there were 7 fat years and then 7 lean years. Remember that story? Well, during the fat years the quantity of food was high. During the 7 lean years the quantity of food was low. Okay. Well, to illustrate that, if I were to put price here in time, it would be the reverse, because during the fat years, the quantity is much bigger, the supply is bigger, so the price is lower. So for example, if this is fat, and this is lean over here, and here we have supply and demand, and let's say the demand is the same because this is price, this is quantity, price and quantity. Here is the demand curve. The demand curve is the same because our bellies are about the same. But during the fat years, supply is way over to the right, so prices are relatively low. And during the lean years, supply is way over to the left, so prices are high. Everyone with me so far on this? Yes? Okay. So what I'm saying is that during the fat years, quantity is high and prices are low. During the lean years, quantity is low and prices are high. Okay. Now we introduce the speculator. What does the speculator do? There's this joke about the old speculator, on his deathbed, and he's going to tell his secret to the neophyte speculator. And what is the secret of the speculator? Buy low, sell high. Okay. Buy at a low price, sell at a high price. You make a lot of profits. The other way, forget about it. Okay, so what is he going to do? What is the speculator going to do during the fat years when prices are low? He's going to buy, because we have this idea of buy low, sell high. Buy low, sell high. So here during the fat years, prices are low, he's going to buy. What he's going to do during the fat year is he's going to add his demand to the extant demand, right? And he's going to push up prices. So prices, say, will be here, where they would have been on the straight line. Yes? Everyone with me? Okay. And what is he going to do with this stuff that he buys? He's going to stick it in a barn, he's going to stick it in a silo, he's going to stick it in his basement, he's going to stick it in a big jar, who knows? He's going to take it away from people. So there'll be less stuff available for people than there otherwise would have been. Right? So the quantity goes down thanks to the speculator, and the price goes up thanks to the speculator. Now comes the lean years. What does he do now? Well, he sells because prices are now high. And in selling, what he does is he adds his supply to the other supply that would have existed in the absence of him. Yes? And prices are now lower than they would have been. And he disgorges quantity, namely when he does this, he takes stuff out of the granaries or out of the silo and he sticks it into the market. So what he's doing is sort of evening out things. That's what the speculator does. He evens out the oscillations of price. He evens out the oscillations of quantity. Okay? That is when he buys low and sells high. If he zigs when he should have zagged, he will exacerbate the thing. But we know what happens to speculators who buy high and sell low. They go broke. So the ones who remain are reasonably good speculators, yes? Okay, now what happens is during the lean years, when prices are very high, the speculator is seen as taking advantage of people's needs. He's exploiting people in the view of people who are ignorant of economics, who are economically illiterate. But we know, thanks to economics, that what he's doing is being the savior of the society. He's not being the enemy of the society. He's helping them, even though they don't realize it, because he's making profits by selling high when he bought low. So don't tell me that you can't do the public good by making profit. Profit is not a dirty word. Profit is not a curse word, and speculators are neither dirty words or curse words. Okay, we now get into canons of justice in taxation. There used to be a big dispute over what is a just price, and the answer is the market price. And what is the just tax? Well, Rothbard's answer is the just tax is a zero tax. I mean, if you have to have a tax, let's have it at a zero rate. That would be justice in taxation, according to Rothbard, and I certainly subscribe to this. Now, another canon of justice in taxation that comes from Adam Smith is that the cost of collection should be low, it should be convenient, and it should be certain. Now, this is good when it applies to the market. The cost of collection should be low. You should collect based on giving people cards like this rather than trying to get a penny out of them and put it in a cup, right? It should be convenient to pay. You should pay a monthly bill instead of a toll. You're driving along at 60 miles an hour and now you have to stop and wait 10 minutes. But it only applies on the market. When the situation is unjust, as are taxes, then the cost of collection should be high, so they'll do less of it. It shouldn't be convenient. It shouldn't be certain. Everything is reversed. So Rothbard says that Adam Smith's canons of taxation apply to the market, but not to taxation, because taxation is unjust. Then there's the question of uniformity of treatment. And this comes from law, that there should be equality from law, equality in law. If Bill Gates and I have a commercial dispute, the court should treat us as if our wealth were either the same or independent of the dispute we're having. They shouldn't give him the nod because he's richer. Fair enough. But to apply that, to take that from where it applies in the area of law and justice and to apply it to an unjust situation such as taxes is all wrong. For example, if equality of treatment means justice, suppose I can only save 10% of the slaves and 90% can't be saved. Then according to equal treatment, I should put the 10% of the slaves that I can save, put them back into slavery so that they're all treated equally. But that would be unjust. I mean, justice means you try to get people to escape from slavery, as many as you can, even if they're not treated equally. Then there's this thing called tax subsidies. When the government doesn't tax the churches, what people say is they're really subsidizing the churches. Well, this is nonsense on stilts. It implies that the government owns 100% of the GDP, and if they don't take it from you, they're giving it to you? No, they're just letting the churches keep it. So rather than oppose exemptions to the churches on taxes, what we ought to do is say everyone should have an exemption. That would be justice. So we shouldn't swallow this fallacy that when the government fails to tax you, they're subsidizing you. Then Murray makes the point that a bureaucrat by the very nature of a bureaucrat, a government employee can't pay taxes. Suppose the bureaucrat is getting $100,000 and he's supposedly paying $30,000 in taxes, and his net income is $70,000, or rather that's what he keeps, but he's not really paying taxes. He's just getting payment of $70,000. Then the question is, what is income? Do you measure income in kind? How about the imputed value of your house? You own a house. You could have been renting it out for $2,000 a month. Do you pay taxes on that? No, that's arbitrary. How many years should it be averaged over? For example, if one year you make zero, and the next year you make 100,000, you're treated very differently if there's a progressive tax than if you made 50,000 in both years, right? So what's the proper time period over which you should average income? And there is no right answer to that. Should income be taxed? How about wealth? What about deduction? Should be allowed to deduct for medical expenditures? Well, how about costs of raising kids? How about for food, clothing, and shelter? It's arbitrary. There is no unambiguous way to do this. Whereas in the market, you don't get into these problems, so you don't have such issues. Then there's the question of what should the level of taxes be, and a lot of people favor a proportional tax. Suppose we had a proportional price, not a proportional tax. You see, right now, prices are like a poll tax. Everyone pays the same for bread. Everyone pays the same for a wristwatch. But suppose prices were proportional. That is, a poor person pays a penny for a watch. I pay $20 for the watch, and Bill Gates pays $1 million for the watch. Namely, you pay a price proportional to your income. Well, what would be the result of that? The result of that would be absolute equality. Bill Gates wouldn't have any more watches than I would, or the poor guy at the end of the day. And what would be the point of making money if you couldn't have more watches and more toys and more of this and more of that? Well, there's a lot more that I could have said about this, but my time is out, so thanks for your attention.